Hello and welcome to the beach. Here we have our self-talk module, how to improve performance by focusing on the present. All of the information from this module comes from our Weinberg and Gould 2019 Foundation of Sport and Exercise Psychology 7th edition. So if you have any things you need to cross-reference, you can reference our textbook for that. All right, so our learning objectives for self-talk. Well, we first want to define concentration and explain how it's related to our performance. We want to explain attentional focus as a three process, or the three processes that are happening at once to within our attentional focus. We want to identify different types of attentional focus and describe factors affecting each one. And then we're going to explain some self-talk, and there's different strategies to improve our attentional focus. That way we can perform our best when it matters the most. All right, so first we want to define concentration. Okay, concentration is essentially defined as the ability to maintain our focus on relevant environmental cues while the environment is rapidly changing, and that our thoughts of the past or future will only increase our attention on irrelevant cues. So staying focused on the present. So simply stated, it's our ability to stay with our attention on the matters at hand in order to perform our best without thinking about future outcomes or past outcomes. All right, so if we look at attention as a process, we have three parts of this process. First is selectivity, next is capacity, and lastly is alertness. Alertness is probably going to impact us the most in this in many ways, because our arousal that we have, whether too high, too low, or optimum, will impact our attentional field. We had discussed attentional field in previous modules, but our attentional field, if we are under aroused, we don't have enough arousal, we're bored at something, or we're just not interested, is really wide, right? So you have this really wide attentional field where you are looking around, you're paying attention to a lot of irrelevant cues. Now, if you are over-aroused, your over-arousal will cause you to be very narrow-focused, and you can only see here. It's like the tunnel vision you get when you're really anxious and you're in the middle of a pressurized situation. We've all experienced that, where once we're out of that pressurized situation, it feels like our perspective opens up, and then we see more, and our breath usually calms down, and our breathing and our respiration calms down, and we feel less anxious. But during those moments of high pressure, it's highly focused. And when we have the optimal arousal, right, that's our optimal arousal, where we have just the right of cues coming in, and we are able to filter in and out those cues, and that leads us into capacity, right? So having too much arousal doesn't allow us to process the correct information in order to make decisions and behave accordingly, right? So our capacity grows as we become better at the task that we are doing. And again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to, one, educate ourselves on these principles, two, is then begin to acquire the skills that these principles allow us to, and then three is to practice and apply them. So again, as we practice and apply mental skills training, we're able to improve our capacity, because at first, especially think about when we're learning something, in the midst of learning, we have to be very thoughtful of the little details, or even the big details. Say, for instance, hitting a ball of sorts. If you're trying to learn how to play baseball, you have to process a lot of things, from your swing balance to keeping your eye on the ball, to lots of other things going on there that could distract you. So your capacity to process information starts out in a very much where we have to think of it in a controlled way. We have to have a lot of cognition in there. And then as we become more proficient in it, a lot of the original things that we need to pay attention to become more automatic, right? And so that becomes our automatic processing, which frees us up to then pay more attention to other things. So as you progress in a skill, that's what allows us to then pay attention to other things other than the skill itself. For instance, if you're learning to type, right? Think about those of you who have learned to type. At first, you had to watch your fingers and see where they are going on the keyboard. After a while, you can then, your fingers know where to go, and you can look around and see look at a piece of paper and type on there. And then lastly, you can add distractions and other things, and you can still type while being distracted. So there are those, that's part of our capacity. Now, our selectivity refers to what we pay attention to, right? So if we are paying attention to a broad spotlight, meaning that we have a lot of incoming cues, we're going to miss the relevant ones because we're paying attention to too many cues. Whereas the same would be if our attentional field is that of a narrow attentional field, that we would only be paying attention to a few cues when we might need to pay attention to more. So again, your spotlight will go from something that's really broad to maybe really narrow, but then we want to find that optimal spotlight so we are paying attention to the most relevant cues. Okay, so types of attentional focus. So don't confuse this with attentional field. As I mentioned before, the attentional field is either broad or narrow or optimal based on your arousal. But that's a little different than what we want to talk about here. Here we're talking about width and direction. Now, width and direction have other components within it. Within the width, there's broad and narrow, similar to attentional field. And then in our direction, it's either internal to us or external, right? So again, the broad and narrow width will be determined by where we should be in our attentional focus process. Okay, so for instance, when you are trying to rapidly assess a situation, such as a quarterback rapidly assessing the positioning of defensive backs in order to know where and when to throw, that is a broad external factor. When we are looking at analyzing a play or a plan, developing a game plan or strategy, now that's within the broad internal aspect of attentional focus. Whereas, for instance, if we are mentally rehearsing an upcoming performance, such as a free throw, a penalty kick, or even a golf putt, that becomes our internal narrow focus of attention. And then lastly, when we are about to execute our actual performance, this is our external narrow attentional focus, right? So take a minute, look at this slide, pause the video if you have to, and kind of wrap your head around the idea of when we need to switch in these attentional focus. Now, we are continually, especially in sports, we are continually moving through each of these focuses rapidly, right? And this goes back to our capacity and our spotlight of what we need to be focusing on. And our alertness will enable us to have the right attentional field for each of these. Okay, so now some factors affecting our attentional focus. We have two broad factors, which are internal distractors and external distractors, right? Internal distractors are going to be mostly cognitive, our thoughts, our worries, our concerns, thinking about the future, thinking about the past. Those things are going to be the most distracting things from an internal perspective. External distractors are going to be things like the shot clock, the crowd, the weather that you're involved in. If it's too windy or too cold or too hot, whatever that might be, that is the stimuli from the environment that's causing to have external factors that will affect our attentional focus. All right, so when we have internal distractors, again, this could be attending to past or future events. This is thinking about the last time I did this, I choked under pressure. That would be something that would be an internal distractor. Overanalyzing body mechanics, right? Becoming too consumed with how our body is moving in space will cause us to have an internal distractor, as well as fatigue and our lack of motivation. If we're not motivated to be in the event that we are participating in, that is part of our internal distractors and will cause a decrement to our attentional focus. Now, external distractors, again, are visual and auditory. So anything and everything that causes us to take our attention away from the task at hand would be, if it's visual or auditory, would be considered an external distractor. Okay. These external distractors cause us to say things to ourselves. Now, what we say, when we say it, how we say it, why we say it is all really important, because our self-talk is that internal monologue that will either help us perform really well in an event, or it will hinder our performance in an event. So let's take a look at a few things about enhancing our concentration through the use of self-talk. Okay, so we have different ways that we talk to ourselves. First off, many of us do it negatively, right? We're critical, we're self-demeaning, we say things like, I'm an idiot, or I suck, or that's terrible, why am I here, kind of things. And those are going to reduce our attentional focus, which reduce our performance and our motivation. Now, the two ways that we should be, and most people think, oh, positive self-talk. Well, yes, there's two ways to talk to us positively. And none of them require us to overinflate the outcomes or the ideas of ourselves, but rather to improve our mood, energy, our attitude. These are things like motivational statements that we say to ourselves. They're not task related. They're more like, you got this, or, come on, together we're champs, right? That's a motivational phrase that you can use. Your I am statements that we're working on, those are all motivational things, right? So that's one way to talk to ourselves. The other way is to instruct ourselves, right? Focus on task-related skills that will improve your execution and the successful outcome of your performance. So those are things like move your feet, breathe, things that will, see the ball, hit the ball. Those are kind of the motivational, or the instructional self-talk statements that you need to develop. So again, when you are developing a strategy to help you with self-talk, you are looking at creating motivational statements, right? Like you did in your focus statements for your goal map, and or instructional statements that will help you complete the task successfully. Now, these are all really important, keys to your success. So it's important that we educate ourselves on why it's important to have good self-talk, motivational, instructional, acquire those skills, and apply them in real life. And take away those negative self-talk statements, because again, when we're looking at what happens when we are negative to ourselves, well, it increases anger and hopelessness. It increases muscle tension, which will decrease performance, right? When we have the correct way of talking to ourselves, because again, we don't have to be positive all the time, but we need to be optimistic, because when we think of things like you see here in this example, keep your eyes on the ball. This match isn't over. That is an instructional and motivational statement in one. Keeping your eyes on the ball is instructional. This match isn't over is motivational. And that will increase your concentration, your optimism, and calm you down. Also times, many of you are going into the field of occupational therapy and or physical therapy. And so that is where we can utilize self-talk in a really incredibly productive and effective way, because injury can oftentimes, again, lead to hopelessness, anger, frustration, the idea that you'll never get back to the events or activities that you once were. And we want to create an environment both in our brains and in our bodies to where we have optimism and an increased motivation to getting back to healthy living. So those are reasons to really work on our self-talk, especially if you struggle with it. Again, this is just another mental skill. Just like you lift to improve your muscles, you can work on these skills to improve your brain muscle, to give you the right kind of comments when you need to. So some techniques for improving self-talk. Well, you want to be short and specific, right? You want to use first person and present tense statements. And yes, it says positive phrases here, but use optimistic phrases. If positivity doesn't seem real to you or genuine, go ahead and make sure it's optimistic, because optimism is possible to, the possibility of an outcome, the hope of the outcome that you want is sometimes more genuine than trying to be positive about an outcome. So, and say it with meaning when you do have these self-talks. Obviously, you want to say it with meaning and attention. Be kind to yourself. And then again, you need to repeat these phrases often outside of competition or outside of the event. That way you have the ability to have them come to you naturally in the moment when you need them. So practice using it in non-competitive situations before using it in competitive situations. All right, here's one strategy. It's called thought stopping. Many of you may already use this without even knowing that it was a strategy, but essentially you use a cue to trigger when a negative thought comes in and arises. You use it as stop. So you can think of even like clapping, stomping. Some people brush their shoulder, like brush it off. Some people will slap their head, slap their thigh, slap their knee. In tennis, I know that they use the racket and slap it on their bottom of their shoes. Those kind of things. Snapping is another one. Thinking snap out of it, is another cue to help you trigger to stop the negative thought. And then you want to reinforce and refocus on task-related cues. So this is when you would bring in an instructional comment to help you refocus your attention back to the present, right? And we're always trying to bring ourselves back to the present, because if you just made a mistake, you can't change the mistake moving forward. But what you can do is stay focused on the present to minimize mistakes moving forward. So that's one strategy called thought stopping. Another strategy is called tick tock. Like sometimes you'll see it even like tick tock, like a clock, but tick tock is what I like to say. You tick out the negative thought, you wipe it away like the hand of a grandfather clock. So you tick out, and when you talk back in, you talk in a positive or optimistic thought to replace the negative one. So you can think of it as tick-tocking your way into a better performance. Okay, here's just a little, you can pause for a second on this slide. Positive self-talk activity. Think about these scenarios and then come up with some of your own scenarios that you've come across and when you have had negative self-talk. And think about it. There's a great way to practice and improve your self-talk is to think about the ones you commonly think about and you commonly say to yourself. Make a list, make a chart. When do you say them? What's the scenario that you say them in? Write down that negative self-talk and then think about a positive self-talk. And then in your goal achievement strategy, think about your ACSI 28 skill that you're trying to improve. What you want to be able to do is then make a list of when you're negative, practice being positive, right? Practice the replacement statement, practice the thought stopping or the tick tock method, and work on replacing those negative self-talk statements with positive self-talk statements. Now to wrap up here on self-talk, there are many great aspects of improving our self-talk. The power of positive self-talk builds confidence, improves positive thinking about ourselves and others, promotes that self-love that we all so desire and need. It's going to help you cope with stress, allows you to take risks, it encourages your motivation and builds your motivation, and it helps you work through challenges. Now again, self-talk is like everything else in our psych skills toolkit. You need to educate yourself on why it's important to do this, acquire the skills through practicing in non-competitive situations, non-threatening situations, and then practice using it in those threatening situations and apply them to your life, right? We want to always remember that our motivational, instructional, self-talk statements can help us be kinder to ourselves. Think about how you treat others when they are struggling. You will then hopefully treat yourself like you treat others, because all too often we don't treat ourselves as kindly as we treat others when it comes to our self-talk and how that works out. So, but at any rate, I hope this module helped empower you with some knowledge about concentration and self-talk. and how you can improve yours to improve your performance. Please let me know if you have any comments, questions, thoughts, or concerns. Email me with any of those things. And as always, together here at the beach, we are champs. Go Beach!